Greetings and welcome to the third episode of Zord's Modded Space Program Season 2. Today I am doing two launches. First I was going to do one launch with two satellites, but it worked out a lot easier if you had two separate launchers. Because the second one wants to go into a very highly elliptical orbit, and this one is going in a circular orbit, low as possible. To add to that, this is a smaller version of the launcher I used last time. Smaller because the payload is smaller, it's one satellite. Of course, if you had been counting the cost of the launchers, it would definitely have been worth it to have one large rocket and launch both the satellites rather than one large and one medium-sized rocket to launch two different satellites. But everything's free, so let's launch some rockets. And as you saw a minute ago, I haven't quite mastered the art of staging solid rocket boosters, because everything just explodes when you stage, and if you're lucky, or rather if it's designed the correct way, things will explode away from you rather than inwards to the rocket and blow everything up, which happened a few times during testing. But this time, the real time, that particular stage went okay. So we are doing the, well, it's standard, but not quite standard for KSP, because we're launching into a 200,000 meter orbit, 200 kilometers, and of course the requirements for the lateral velocity is huge. So staging and the fairings goes, well, away about as well as they used to. And I'm gonna open the solar panels and start the keyframe scanner, which is the entire point of the satellite. And using small SRBs to get the fuel flowing in the correct way. I'm not sure if they're necessary, but it works with them, and once it didn't really work without them, so whatever. It's nice and interesting path the Remote Tech 2 uses. Well, it makes a path, and I can't see that the light speed delay is actually implemented, so I'll just let it be. As long as you have connection, because the not connected thing, that works, so there's still a need for a satellite network. So we're trying to build vertical velocity, and it takes a ridiculously huge rocket, I think, to even get this very small satellite into orbit. But then you think, when you get to the moon, you need a much bigger one. So yeah, okay, what happened? Wait, was that? Oh yeah, that was the camera trying to switch to orbital mode. And with that, we have way overshot our orbit. Let's release the satellite. It has its own engines. We can circularize the orbit. And it's not quite balanced, so we want to make one of them run a little lower. Okay, so yeah, that's way above where we need it. But throttling forward means I'm gonna run into the stage, dropped stage, and this is where I have a bit of a enormous brain fart, because I shut down the engines and they can only start once, so the satellite's stuck in that orbit unless I manually go up and refill the engines with starting resource, whatever, from the engine igniter mod. But nah, it can stay. It's not critical that I have a full map of the keyframe on Earth. It's just basically practice. Anyway, we're launching the second rocket, and this is the other satellite that's going to a very much elongated elliptical orbit. And this is the same kind of rocket we used last time. It's the bigger version. It has more fuel. Look at the separatrons exploding. It has more fuel, and it has, the satellite itself has a decent amount of fuel on it. So we are just trying to get this into a polar orbit as well. It's going to start in a almost identical orbit, but it's going to go way way far out, about as far out as the moon, I'm thinking. This is a long-range communication satellite. I won't have any use for it in the immediate future, but I need it to be there as part of the communications infrastructure, because we're going to Mars eventually, and then it's definitely going to be needed. So far the launch is going well. We're coming up on first stage separation here. Jettison the fairings, and there we go. I really wish the fairings could have a bit more of a push outwards. And I know you could tweak this, and I have been trying all kinds of things, and sometimes they just don't even move. I think this has to do with the strut bug, that the struts are not separated on the same time as the rest of the craft. And the fact that I could get the fairings to separate at all is good, I suppose. And this time none of them caught onto the spacecraft and was dragged along to orbit. That's a plus. So we are using the second stage to push our satellite into a orbit. We are still well below orbital velocity. Very well below. And this is going to have a periapsis of, I don't know, something 200 kilometers or maybe more. Should probably be more now that I think about it. And the point of the mission is to have a apoapsis that is somewhere around the moon, or not at the moon, but at the same distance from Kerbin, so that I can use the small antenna to communicate with the communication satellites that are already in orbit, and use that now folded up huge dish on the front of the spacecraft to communicate with anything and hopefully everything, at least one at a time. But to get to this kind of orbit we need to spend a lot of fuel. So we're using up the fuel in the second stage, and then the spacecraft or the satellite itself is going to take over and use its own engine and its own fuel. The fuel it's using is hydrogen and oxygen instead of kerosene, rocket fuel, regular rocket fuel, which means that it weighs less than it looks like it does, but it's quite efficient. Okay, we have orbit, great, and we still have fuel in the second stage, which is even better. And there we go, we're out. This stage is going to become space debris, because I don't care. I'm taking a similar approach to the real life space program, is dumping all kinds of stuff in orbit. Disclaimer, nowadays there's actually a protocol that mandates that you can dispose of things you launch, but I mean, there's tons of stuff in orbit already. Okay, so my satellite lost connection for a few seconds there, or a few minutes, and now that we regain connection we're in the shadow. So no power, but that doesn't matter. We have the largest battery equipped on this spacecraft. This spacecraft is also asymmetric, so I need to run the RCS thrusters while I run the engine. But fortunately we have tons of hydrazine, which is the RCS fuel, so we can afford to do this. This is not a problem. And now we wait for the apoapsis to get out to 400 million meters, or something in the neighborhood of that. As you can see, the amount of liquid O2 decreases far faster than the amount of hydrazine. And there we go. That's good enough. This gives us an orbit with a period of something like 10 days, and almost all of these days are going to be spent way out from Kerbin. There we go. We deployed the big antenna. Let's warp till sunshine so that we can see the satellite in all its glory, and also align the solar panels so that we can get maximum energy. Not that we need it, but anyway. Yeah, the idea with this kind of orbit is that the satellite can spend a large amount of time well away from Earth, so that we don't even have to worry about being in radio shadow, because there's going to be missions, as I said, out to Mars, and we don't want to have the connections interrupted because the satellite went behind the Earth. Of course, this is going to happen, but fortunately not a lot. So let's take a look at the debris we left behind. This part of the craft has a probe core, so we can rename this to debris, but we can't really do anything else. We can't really turn it or start the engine or remove it, so it's just gonna stay there. I mean, we're going to do most of our launches into equatorial orbits, so this isn't a problem. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this week. I thank you for watching and hope to see you next time. Goodbye!